A strong woman understands one of the most critical principles of self-mastery. Not everything deserves a reaction. Toxic people thrive on impulsive responses. They bait you, provoke you, and hope you'll lose control. Because if they can pull you into their emotional chaos, they win not by being right, but by dragging you down to their level. But a strong woman doesn't hand over her emotional control that easily. She knows the difference between reacting emotionally and responding strategically, and she always chooses the latter. Reaction is instinctive. It's fast, it's heated, and it's often regretted later. Reaction gives the toxic person exactly what they want: your energy, your time, your peace. Strong women have learned, often the hard way, that immediate reactions to manipulation or provocation only feed the fire. So instead of snapping back, they pause, they observe, they give themselves space to assess what's really going on beneath the surface. Because precision requires clarity, and clarity doesn't exist in chaos. Responding, on the other hand, is intentional. It's rooted in emotional intelligence. When a strong woman responds, she's not trying to win an argument or prove her worth. She's not interested in being louder, she's interested in being effective. She listens to what's being said, not just the words, but the tone, the pattern, the motive behind them. Then she decides whether it's worth her voice at all. That's precision. Sometimes the most powerful response is silence. Sometimes it's a short sentence with zero emotion. And sometimes it's disengaging completely, not out of fear, but out of mastery. This kind of control isn't passive. It's a practiced, deliberate choice. It's knowing your triggers, understanding your values, and holding your boundaries with surgical accuracy. Toxic people will test this. They'll try to provoke guilt, anger, or self-doubt, but a strong woman has already done the inner work. She doesn't react to every trigger because she has processed her own insecurities. She doesn't need to be liked by everyone, and she's not afraid to be misunderstood, especially by people who never intended to understand her in the first place. Responding with precision also means knowing that not every situation needs your emotional investment. A strong woman doesn't need to comment on every insult, defend herself against every rumor, or fight back in every confrontation. She chooses her battles wisely and rarely. Her goal isn't to control the toxic person, it's to control herself. That's the real power, staying centered while everything around you tries to knock you off balance. This level of restraint, insight, and emotional discipline doesn't happen overnight. It's built through experience, self-awareness, and a clear sense of identity. When you know who you are, you don't feel the need to prove it. And when you no longer feel the need to prove yourself to toxic people, you become untouchable in ways that reaction could never achieve. A strong woman doesn't ask for permission to protect her peace. She doesn't wait for others to understand her limits, nor does she explain them to people who are already committed to crossing them. For her, boundaries are not warnings, they are decisions. They're not open for debate. They're not influenced by guilt, approval, or the reactions of others. They are firm, clear, and enforced without apology. Toxic people don't respect vague lines. They look for loopholes. They test tolerance. If they sense uncertainty or hesitation, they push further. This is exactly why a strong woman doesn't leave space for interpretation. She sets her boundaries with confidence, not as an act of defense, but as an act of self-respect. She doesn't say, "I prefer not to be spoken to that way." She says, "I won't engage with someone who disrespects me." She doesn't say, "It bothers me when you cross that line." She says, "If that line is crossed again, I will remove myself." This isn't about being cold. It's about being clear. Boundaries are not walls to isolate, they are gates that filter. A strong woman uses them to protect her time, her energy, her emotional well-being. She knows what drains her and what strengthens her. And more importantly, she knows that she is responsible for protecting her space because no one else will do it for her. Toxic people thrive where there is access. They rely on emotional confusion, blurred roles, and unspoken resentment. A strong woman does not give them that opportunity. Her boundaries are communicated early and reinforced consistently, not loudly, not dramatically, but firmly. And when those boundaries are crossed, she doesn't argue, beg, or repeat herself. She acts, she walks away, she limits access. She lets her behavior speak louder than her explanations. Enforcing boundaries is not always comfortable. It often disappoints people who benefit from your lack of them. That doesn't stop a strong woman. She doesn't let guilt override her need for emotional safety. She doesn't shrink herself to keep the peace. She doesn't dilute her standards just because someone calls her difficult or too much. She understands that discomfort is temporary, but self-betrayal has a long shelf life, so she chooses herself every time. She also knows that boundaries aren't just external, they're internal. They guide how she talks to herself, how she handles failure, how she responds to pressure. She doesn't just set boundaries with others, she sets them within her own mind. She shuts down self-criticism, negative spirals, and toxic patterns of thinking. Because a woman who honors her own limits becomes immune to the chaos of others. Boundaries are not signs of arrogance, they are signs of alignment. When a woman is deeply connected to her values, her limits become non-negotiable. She doesn't explain her worth. She doesn't seek validation. She doesn't wait for someone to earn her respect before she protects her peace. She builds her boundaries like she builds her life, intentionally, unapologetically, and without compromise. A strong woman doesn't take people at face value, she reads between the lines. She's not just listening to what someone says, she's observing how they say it, why they say it, and what they're really trying to achieve beneath the surface. Words can be polished, rehearsed, and weaponized, but energy, tone, body language, timing, those don't lie. She's fluent in unspoken language because she knows that toxic people rarely show their true hand through words alone. This is more than intuition, it's situational awareness. A strong woman pays attention to the entire environment, who's silent when they should speak up, who laughs a little too loudly at someone else's expense, who constantly shifts blame without taking responsibility. These details matter. Toxic behavior is often subtle. A backhanded compliment, a passive-aggressive tone, a dismissive glance during a conversation. She catches it all, not because she's looking for drama, but because she refuses to be caught off guard by it. She also watches for patterns. One snide comment might be ignored. A repeated pattern of sarcasm, control, or manipulation is something else entirely. Strong women track behavior over time. They don't make snap judgments, but they don't excuse red flags either. They're not swayed by charm or credentials. Someone can sound respectful and still be dismissive. They can smile and still be condescending. She notices when the words and the energy don't match, and that mismatch is enough for her to step back and reassess. Reading the room also means recognizing emotional manipulation when it's happening. A toxic person may play the victim to gain sympathy, use guilt as leverage, or shift blame to avoid accountability. But a strong woman doesn't get pulled into that emotional game. She can feel when a compliment is being used as a setup, when an apology is meant to disarm rather than take responsibility, and when concern is just a disguised form of control. She doesn't fall for tone over substance. She pays attention to intent, not just delivery. She also understands timing, who speaks up only when it benefits them, who stays quiet in moments that require support, and who changes their stance depending on the room they're in. Toxic people often reveal themselves not through conflict, but through inconsistency. A strong woman watches for that. She doesn't confront every discrepancy, but she files it away. She builds a picture of the person over time, one subtle cue at a time. It's not about being paranoid or overanalyzing every conversation. It's about protecting herself from manipulation, betrayal, and energy leaks. She doesn't need to interrogate every word someone says because she's already listening to everything else: tone, timing, body language, silence. While others may be distracted by charm or credentials, she's focused on alignment, integrity, and consistency. She trusts her instincts because she's done the work to sharpen them. She doesn't second guess what she sees just because it's uncomfortable or socially inconvenient. When the words say one thing and the room says another, she trusts the room every time. A strong woman doesn't decorate her boundaries with explanations. She knows that no is not the beginning of a negotiation, it's the end of one. It doesn't come with apologies, long stories, or softened edges. It stands alone because it's backed by clarity, self-respect, and a deep understanding of her own limits. She doesn't say no to be difficult. She says it to protect what matters most: her time, her energy, her peace of mind. Toxic people often thrive on eroding boundaries that aren't clearly enforced. They count on hesitation. They expect you to justify yourself. They look for guilt, confusion, or people-pleasing tendencies they can exploit. But a strong woman refuses to play that game. She knows that the more she explains, the more room she gives someone to push back. So she says it once, firmly and calmly: no, not maybe later, not I wish I could, not let me think about it. Just no, without performance, without apology. She understands that saying no doesn't make her mean. It makes her honest. It doesn't mean she's selfish, it means she's self-aware. She's not responsible for how others feel about her boundaries. She's only responsible for setting and keeping them. And if someone takes offense to her no, she recognizes that as a reflection of their entitlement, not her rudeness. People who respect you don't need 10 reasons to hear a simple boundary. They take your word and move on. This clarity allows her to move through the world with confidence. She's not overbooked, overextended, or overwhelmed because she's not afraid to decline what doesn't serve her. She doesn't volunteer her energy to every cause, every crisis, or every request that comes her way. She knows her capacity, and she honors it. That's not weakness, that's discipline. She also understands that no applies across all areas of life. No to conversations that drain her. No to relationships that demand her silence. No to work that compromises her values. No to apologies she doesn't owe. She doesn't need to argue to assert her limits. She simply states them, stands by them, and walks away when they're disrespected. Her strength lies not in her ability to endure discomfort, but in her willingness to avoid it altogether when it's unnecessary or harmful. And when people push back, and they do, she doesn't waver. She doesn't get pulled into defending her choice. She doesn't make herself smaller so others can feel more comfortable. She accepts that not everyone will like her decisions, and she's made peace with that. Approval isn't her currency, peace is, and if protecting her peace means being misunderstood, she's fine with that trade. She's also teaching others how to treat her. Every time she says no with certainty, she's setting a precedent. She's communicating that her time is not up for grabs. Her emotions are not tools to be manipulated, and her life is not open for other people's control. A strong woman knows that silence is sometimes more powerful than confrontation. When she recognizes toxic behavior, she doesn't announce her departure with drama or theatrics. She doesn't waste energy trying to make the other person understand the damage they've done. She simply removes herself quietly, cleanly, and without ceremony. Her exit isn't about revenge, attention, or teaching anyone a lesson. It's about choosing herself and reclaiming her peace. Toxic people often expect chaos. They expect yelling, accusations, or long emotional explanations. They thrive on the energy that conflict provides because it keeps them in control of the emotional narrative. But when a strong woman walks away without engaging, she takes that control back. She doesn't need to win the last word. She doesn't need to prove a point. Her strength is in knowing that detachment is more effective than destruction. Walking away without making a scene takes discipline. It requires her to let go of the desire to be understood or vindicated. It means accepting that closure doesn't always come through conversation. Sometimes it comes through action. A strong woman doesn't chase clarity from people who benefit from confusion. She understands that trying to explain her boundaries to someone who refuses to respect them is an emotional trap. So, instead of explaining herself again and again, she steps back. Her absence becomes her boundary. This kind of eggs, it isn't passive, it's powerful. It's intentional. It says, "I've seen enough." Without needing to justify the decision, it says, "This is where I stop participating," without burning the house down on her way out. It's a calm, clear withdrawal that speaks volumes without uttering a word. Toxic people don't get access to her energy, her tears, or her explanations. They get distance. She also knows that making a scene often gives the toxic person exactly what they want: a reason to dismiss her, a narrative to twist, or a way to paint her as irrational. By leaving with grace and resolve, she denies them that opportunity. Her calmness is not weakness, it's control. It's a sign that she has nothing left to prove and no interest in staying where she's not valued or safe. This behavior reflects deep emotional intelligence. She doesn't need to damage someone else to honor herself. She doesn't seek public validation for private decisions. And she doesn't linger in situations that have clearly shown her there's no room for growth or mutual respect. The moment she realizes she's sacrificing her well-being for the sake of keeping the peace, she knows it's time to leave, not loudly, but with finality. Even when emotions run high, she holds her composure. She gives herself permission to choose peace over proving a point. And while others may wonder why she didn't fight harder, she knows that not all battles are worth the bruise. She's not afraid to leave quietly because she understands that self-respect doesn't need an audience. A strong woman doesn't need to be the loudest voice in the room to be heard. She doesn't need to dominate conversations, prove her worth, or be seen winning every argument. Her confidence is quiet but firm because it's rooted in self-respect, not ego. While ego demands attention and validation, self-respect moves with calm certainty. She doesn't seek to control others. She controls herself. Ego is reactive. It gets easily offended, constantly compares, and always needs to be right. It thrives on recognition and struggles with silence. But a strong woman has no interest in winning the approval of people who don't align with her values. She doesn't chase applause, and she doesn't measure her value through how others see her. She knows her worth is not up for debate, and that makes her unshakable. When confronted with toxic behavior, she doesn't respond with arrogance or aggression. She doesn't try to one-up or belittle. That's not strength, that's insecurity disguised as dominance. Instead, she responds with clarity and composure. She doesn't let someone else's chaos drag her into a reactionary state. Her self-respect allows her to observe, assess, and act in alignment with her principles, not her pride. She understands that ego wants to be right, but self-respect wants to be at peace, so she doesn't argue just to win. If the conversation turns into a power struggle, she steps away, not because she's afraid of conflict, but because she doesn't invest energy where it won't be respected. Walking away doesn't make her weak, it shows restraint, which takes far more strength than shouting someone down. She also knows that her value isn't tied to her ability to please everyone. Self-respect gives her the freedom to say no without guilt, to walk away without explanation, and to prioritize her well-being without feeling selfish. While ego says, you need to prove yourself, self-respect says, you already know who you are. And because she knows who she is, she doesn't compromise her integrity just to keep the peace or maintain an image. In relationships, she doesn't need to be worshipped, she needs to be respected. She doesn't demand loyalty, she inspires it through consistency, honesty, and boundaries. She doesn't play games to gain control. She stays rooted in truth, even when it's inconvenient. Her power doesn't come from how many people follow her, it comes from how well she follows her own standards. Even in leadership, she's guided by responsibility, not superiority. She listens more than she speaks, owns her mistakes, and gives credit where it's due. Ego builds walls to appear untouchable. Self-respect builds bridges to stay accountable. That's the difference. She doesn't need to diminish others to stand tall. Her strength lies in how she carries herself, not in how she compares herself. She refuses to compromise her values for short-term validation. While ego demands more attention, more status, more control, self-respect demands better choices, better relationships, better environments. One builds an image, the other builds a foundation. She chooses the foundation every time.